The phone rang at exactly midnight. A fine rain tapped against the window of my bedroom in Asheville, North Carolina. The same bedroom I had shared with Walter for 42 years. The same phone that had sat on his nightstand. I recognized the ringtone. It was his cell phone. Impossible. Walter had been buried that morning after 3 months fighting a cancer that consumed his body but never his spirit. I froze. The Riverside Cemetery soil was still damp when I threw the handful of earth onto his casket. My fingers, wrinkled by time and trembling with grief, fumbled in the darkness until they found the source of that sound. Walter's cell phone wasn't there. Our son, Richard, 45 years old, had taken all his father's belongings. Then I realized the sound was coming from inside the drawer Walter always kept locked, the drawer that I, in 42 years of marriage, had never opened. Let me tell you what led to this moment. Our lives were simple and predictable in our valley home. The sound of cicadas in summer marked time while Walter tended the garden. I baked apple pies that filled the house with a sweet aroma. We raised 3 children. Richard, the oldest, serious and determined like his father. Rebecca, 43, sensitive and creative. And Ryan, 38, our rebellious youngest, who moved to Seattle 15 years ago. Walter was a math teacher at the local school. Respected, quiet, methodical, I gave piano lessons to neighborhood children. Our life had rhythm, like a well-rehearsed song, or so I thought. That night, with trembling hands, I searched for the key. I had never minded the locked drawer. We respected each other's spaces. The key was at the bottom of the jewelry box Walter gave me on our 30th anniversary, as if he knew I would find it someday. The phone continued ringing. 1, 2, 3 rings. The wind stirred the lace curtains. I felt a shiver run down my spine, not from fear, but from premonition. The drawer opened with a creak. Inside was an old cell phone, not the smartphone Walter used. This was a basic model, the kind that only makes calls, and it was ringing. The name on the screen, Marion. I didn't know any Marion. I answered. Silence. Then a female voice, trembling, elderly. Walter, is that you? Why didn't you come today? My heart stopped. Walter passed away yesterday, I replied weakly. A long silence, then a muffled sob. Who is speaking? Eleanor, his wife. The phone disconnected. The next morning, while neighbors brought food, tradition in Asheville for grieving families, I examined the contents of the drawer. I found receipts from a nursing home in Greenville, an hour from here, monthly payments for 15 years. The resident's name, Marion Winters, the same surname. A relative? Walter had never mentioned her. Richard arrived to help with insurance documents. I showed him the receipts. His face paled. Mom, I think it's better to leave this alone. What do you know, Richard? Nothing, he answered too quickly, avoiding my gaze. The first clear lie my son had ever told me. That day was the first of a winter that lasted 6 months, despite the calendar marking spring. The house suddenly seemed too big, the empty rooms echoing with each step. The visits decreased. Rebecca returned to Charlotte with her husband, Thomas, and their 10-year-old twins, Lily and Lucas. Ryan didn't come to the funeral. He sent flowers and a short note. A week later, I drove to the nursing home in Greenville. The smell of disinfectant and the muffled sound of television greeted me. At reception, I asked for Marion Winters. Room 218, relative? Yes, I answered, not knowing if it was true. Marion was 82. She sat by the window, watching birds at a feeder. Thin white hair, pale blue eyes, the same eyes as Walter's. When she saw me, she showed no surprise. You answered the phone, she said simply. Who are you? Walter's sister, older sister. I felt the floor disappear. In 42 years, Walter had never mentioned a sister, never talked about his family, only that they were all deceased. Marion smiled sadly. He never told you about me, did he? Why? Shame. I have schizophrenia. When we were young, that was considered a disgrace to the family. I returned home stunned, carrying the weight of a truth Walter had hidden throughout our life together. Why had he never trusted me? What else had he hidden? The following week, Richard visited me again. I confronted him. Did you know about Aunt Marion? He hesitated. Dad told me when I turned 18. He asked me never to mention it to you. Said it was to protect you, that you suffered from anxiety and wouldn't handle it well. Anxiety? I'd never had anxiety in my life. Another lie from Walter. The next day, I found Rebecca rummaging through her father's office. She was putting books in boxes. What are you doing? Organizing, Mom, that's all. but I noticed she was looking for something. Her restless eyes, nervous hands. "Rebecca, what do you know that I don't?" She stopped, looked at me. "Nothing, Mom." Another lie. My children. Walter's accomplices. Winter passed. Flowers began to appear in the garden Walter had loved so much. I visited Marion regularly. She told me about their childhood in Vermont, how their parents institutionalized her when symptoms appeared, how Walter, at 18, promised to take care of her but asked her to keep her existence a secret. "He was ashamed of me," she said, without resentment. "No, he was ashamed of himself," I replied, finally understanding something about the man I had lived with. Marion passed away peacefully 3 months after Walter. She was at peace. I was not. In summer, Ryan returned home for the first time in years, tall, thin, with stubble. He reminded me so much of Walter in his youth that it hurt to look at him. I found him in the attic, rummaging through old boxes. "What are you looking for?" he startled. "Nothing important, Mom." "Enough lies, Ryan. What are you all hiding?" Ryan sat on the dusty floor. He looked tired, defeated. "It's not my secret to tell. It's my life, Ryan. I have the right to know." He sighed deeply. "There's another brother. Half-brother, actually." The world stopped. "What?" "Dad had a son before he met you, with a woman named Catherine in Providence. The boy is 48 now. His name is Daniel." Providence. Walter studied there before we met. He said they were just 2 years of his life. "Why hide this? I would have understood." Ryan laughed without humor. "It's not that simple, Mom. Daniel has Down syndrome. Dad abandoned Catherine when he discovered the pregnancy. Years later, when he was already established here with you, Catherine found him. She threatened to tell everything if he didn't help financially." The floor disappeared again. "Walter, my Walter, abandoning a pregnant woman? How do you know this?" "Dad told me when I left for Seattle. I thought he had told you all too." Another secret, another facet of the man I thought I knew. In autumn, I traveled to Providence. The air smelled of sea and dry leaves. I found Catherine in a small, cozy house in the suburbs. At 70, she had dignity in her eyes and strength in the hands that held mine. "I don't come to judge," I said. "I just want to understand the man I lived with." She offered me tea. We sat in the garden while Daniel, a gentle man with an easy smile, fed the squirrels. Walter was young and ambitious, Catherine told me. When he learned about the syndrome, he said he couldn't have a child like that it would ruin his plans. Did he change afterward? He sent money, yes, but he never wanted to meet Daniel. I watched Walter's son playing in the garden. I felt a deep pain thinking about everything my husband had lost through pride and shame. I returned to Asheville with a heavy heart. In the mailbox, a letter from Rebecca. "Mom, I need to confess something. 10 years ago, I found the papers about Daniel in Dad's office. I confronted him. He begged me not to tell you. He said you would never understand, that it would destroy your marriage. I believed him. Forgive me." Winter returned. A year since Walter's death. A year discovering that the man I loved for 4 decades was a stranger. On the eve of the anniversary of his death, the phone rang again at midnight. I answered without hesitation. It was Richard. "Mom, I found something. Dad's diary. You need to read it." The next day, he gave me a worn notebook written in Walter's meticulous handwriting. It dated from 30 years ago. I read all night. Walter wrote about his shame for abandoning Catherine and Daniel, about how this guilt consumed him, how he planned to tell me everything several times, but fear paralyzed him. "Eleanor deserves a better man than me," he wrote. "I fear that if she knows the truth, she will see the coward I am. I prefer to live with this pain than lose her respect." On the last page, a letter to me never delivered. "Eleanor, when you read this, I will be gone. I live divided between the man I wanted to be for you and the man I really am. Forgive me for not having courage. I hope that one day you can understand that despite my flaws, every moment by your side was true." That spring, I invited everyone for lunch at our house. Richard and his wife Jennifer, Rebecca, Thomas and the twins, Ryan, who decided to stay in Asheville, and for the first time, Catherine and Daniel. When everyone was gathered in the garden Walter had loved so much, I told the complete truth about Marion, about Daniel, about the secrets and lies. "Walter wasn't perfect," I said. "Neither am I, nor anyone here. But now, there are no more secrets between us." Daniel smiled with that pure smile Walter never knew. Catherine squeezed my hand in silence. The grandchildren ran among the flowers Walter had planted. At night, alone in the bedroom, I looked at the empty side of the bed. "I would have understood, Walter," I whispered. "I would have loved all your broken parts." The phone in the drawer never rang again. It didn't need to. The truth was finally out, and with it came a peace I had never known before. Sometimes, when the sun sets over the mountains of Asheville and the cicadas begin their night song, I feel Walter nearby. Not the Walter I knew for 42 years, but the complete man, with his flaws, secrets, and regrets. And strangely, I love this true man more than the perfect version he tried to be. Because even a broken heart can find peace when truth comes to light. If you've ever discovered a truth too late, make sure you're subscribed. Here, each story is a mirror of life. The seasons changed, but my confusion didn't. I found myself walking through our home touching Walter's things. His reading glasses still on the nightstand, his slippers under the bed, his favorite mug in the kitchen cabinet. Everything exactly where he'd left it, as if he might walk through the door at any moment. I began spending hours in his study, a room I'd rarely entered before. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with mathematics, textbooks, and journals. His desk was meticulously organized. Pens aligned, papers stacked, calculator positioned just so. Walter had always been orderly, predictable, or so I'd thought. I opened the drawer where I'd found the phone and examined its other contents more carefully. Besides the nursing home receipts, there were birthday cards signed "Love, Marion," dating back 15 years. There were also photographs, old yellowed pictures of two children, a boy and a girl standing in front of a small white house with green shutters. The boy was unmistakably Walter, perhaps 10 years old, his serious expression already formed. The girl, slightly older, had his same eyes but wore a hesitant smile. Marion. There was something else, a small leather-bound book. Inside, in childish handwriting, "Property of Walter Winters, age 12. A diary. I hesitated. Reading it felt like trespassing, even now, but I needed to understand. The entries were sporadic, mostly about school and science experiments. Then I found an entry dated June 17, 1956. Mom and Dad took Marion away today. They said she's sick and needs special doctors. She was screaming and crying. They told me not to tell anyone about her. Dad said we have to pretend she never existed or people will think our family has bad blood. I don't understand. Marion is just Marion. Sometimes she sees things that aren't there, but she's still my sister. The next entry was months later. I visited Marion today. The place is scary. She looked so small in that big white room. She didn't recognize me at first. Then she smiled and asked if I brought her book. I forgot it. I won't forget next time. But the entries about Marion grew less frequent, then stopped altogether. The last mention was on his 18th birthday. "I'm leaving for college tomorrow. I promised Marion I would take care of her forever. I don't know if I can keep that promise, but I'll try. No one at college will know about her. It's better that way." I closed the diary, my heart aching for the boy who carried such a burden of family shame, and for the man who never found the courage to share it. The phone call from Richard came a week later. His voice sounded strained. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something. Can I come over?" Richard arrived that afternoon, carrying a cardboard box. He placed it on the coffee table between us, but kept his hand on top, as if reluctant to reveal its contents. "I found this in Dad's storage unit downtown. I didn't know he had one until I found the key and bill in his desk." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "There's something you should see." He opened the box and pulled out a stack of letters tied with twine. The envelopes were addressed to Walter Winters, all from the same sender, Catherine Donahue, Providence, Rhode Island. "I've read one," Richard admitted, "just to understand what they were. I think you should read them yourself." I took the bundle, my hands trembling slightly. Why would your father keep a separate storage unit? What else was there? Richard shifted in his seat. "Financial records mostly, and..." He hesitated. "There were toys, children's books, a wooden train set still in its original box, never opened." That night, after Richard left, I sat at the kitchen table and untied the twine. The letters were arranged chronologically, spanning nearly 5 decades. I started with the earliest, dated September 1973. "Dear Walter, it's been 2 months since you left Providence. I've tried calling your parents home, but they say you're unavailable. I need to tell you something important. I'm pregnant, almost 4 months now. Please call me. We need to talk about this. Catherine, the next few letters grew increasingly desperate. Walter, please respond. I don't expect anything from you, but this is your child too. I'm due in February. The doctors say there may be complications. They've mentioned Down syndrome. I'm scared, Walter. I need you. Daniel was born yesterday. He's beautiful. He does have Down syndrome, but he's perfect in every way. The doctors say he's healthy otherwise. I wish you could see him. He has your eyes. Then came the letter that made my blood run cold. I saw your engagement announcement in the Providence Journal. Eleanor seems lovely. Does she know about Daniel? About me? I won't contact you again. I just wanted you to know that your son is doing well despite your absence. I hope your conscience allows you to sleep at night. Catherine. I read until dawn, tears streaming down my face. The later letters were sent annually, usually around Daniel's birthday, with updates on his development, his struggles, and achievements. Catherine never asked for money in these letters, just acknowledged its receipt with brief thanks. The final letter was dated just 5 years ago. Walter, Daniel turns 43 next month. He works at the library now, shelving books. He loves it. He still asks about you sometimes. I've never told him the truth, that his father chose to pretend he doesn't exist. Instead, I told him you live far away and can't visit. He accepts this with more grace than I could ever muster. I'm writing because I've been diagnosed with breast cancer. The prognosis is good, but it's made me think about Daniel's future. The money you send goes into a trust for him, which I appreciate. But money isn't everything, Walter. He deserves to know his family, his half-siblings at least. They're adults now. It should be their choice whether to know their brother. I'm not asking for myself anymore. I'm asking for Daniel. Catherine. I sat motionless as the morning light filtered through the kitchen window. Outside, a cardinal landed on the bird feeder Walter had built. Its bright red plumage stood out against the green backdrop of spring leaves, life continuing, oblivious to human pain. How could Walter have lived with this secret for so long? How could he have looked into our children's eyes, knowing they had a brother they'd never met? How could he have looked into mine? The phone rang, startling me. It was Rebecca. Mom, I'm coming over. There's something I need to tell you. An hour later, Rebecca sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea. She looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from carrying a heavy secret. I knew about Daniel, she said finally. I've known for 10 years. How? My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. I found papers in Dad's office when I was helping him organize his tax records, medical bills for Daniel, letters from Catherine. When I confronted him, he broke down. He told me everything about abandoning Catherine when she was pregnant, about learning Daniel had Down syndrome, about his shame and regret. And you kept his secret, I said. It wasn't a question. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. He begged me to. He said it would destroy you, destroy our family. He said he'd spent decades trying to make up for his mistake by being the best husband and father he could be. I believed him. She wiped her eyes. I thought I was protecting you, Mom. I'm so sorry. I reached across the table and took her hand. It wasn't your secret to keep, Rebecca. It wasn't your burden to bear. There's more, she said quietly. I've met Daniel. I stared at her, speechless. After Dad told me, I couldn't stop thinking about him, my brother out there, not knowing us. So I went to Providence. I told Dad I was attending a teaching conference, but I went to meet Daniel and Catherine. What are they like? I whispered. A small smile touched Rebecca's lips. Daniel is wonderful. He has Dad's laugh. Can you believe it? That same deep chuckle. He works at a library, loves trains and birds. He collects baseball cards and knows all the statistics. Her voice softened, and Catherine is remarkable. Strong, kind. She never said a bad word about Dad, even after everything. Did you tell them who you were? Rebecca nodded. Catherine recognized me immediately, said I looked like Dad's mother. Daniel was so excited to meet his sister. He asked so many questions about all of us. Her face crumpled. He asked when he could meet everyone else. I didn't know what to say. I felt a surge of anger, not at Rebecca, but at Walter, at the web of lies he'd woven that now entangled our children. Does Richard know? Ryan? I don't think so. Dad swore me to secrecy. He said he would tell everyone eventually, but wanted to find the right time. She laughed bitterly. The right time never came. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Daniel, a man in his 40s who had never known his father or his siblings. About Catherine raising a child alone while Walter built a life with me, a life built on omission if not outright lies. About Marion, hidden away, visited in secret. Who was this man I had married? The Walter I thought I knew was honest, principled, devoted to family. Had that all been a performance? Or had he been trying, in his flawed way, to atone for the mistakes of his youth? The next morning, I called Ryan in Seattle. It was early there, but he answered on the second ring. "Mom, is everything okay?" "I need to ask you something, Ryan. Did your father ever tell you about Daniel?" A long pause. "Who's Daniel?" I explained everything. Marion, Catherine, Daniel, the secrets Walter had kept for decades. Ryan listened in silence. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "Jesus, Mom. No, Dad never told me anything about this." Another pause. "Actually, that's not entirely true. He called me about 6 months ago, before he got really sick. Said he needed to tell me something important, something he should have told me years ago, but he wanted to do it in person." "And?" "I was busy with work. Told him it could wait until Christmas." Ryan's voice cracked. "Then he got worse, and by Christmas he was too sick for serious conversations. I thought it was about his will or some financial matter. I never imagined—" "It's not your fault," I said automatically, though part of me wanted to scream at him for not making time for his dying father. But hadn't I done the same? Accepted Walter's evasions? Respected his privacy to the point of willful blindness? "I'm coming home," Ryan said suddenly. "I need to be there. We need to figure this out as a family." After we hung up, I sat on the porch swing Walter had installed when we first bought the house. It was a perfect spring day. The azaleas Walter had planted along the walkway were in full bloom, their pink and white blossoms vibrant against the dark green foliage. I remembered how Walter would sit here in the evenings, especially after he retired, watching the sunset over the mountains. He seemed at peace then, content. Was he? Or was he always haunted by the choices he'd made, the people he'd left behind? I thought about our life together, 42 years of shared meals, shared beds, shared dreams. The children we'd raised, the home we'd built. Had it all been a lie? No, not a lie. A partial truth, perhaps. A life lived in compartments, with doors firmly closed between them. The realization came slowly, then all at once. I hadn't really known Walter. I'd known the version of himself he allowed me to see, the version he thought I wanted, or the version he wished he was, but not the whole man, with all his flaws and failures. And hadn't I done the same? Presented the best version of myself, hidden the parts I was ashamed of? We all do, to some extent. But Walter's omissions were of a different magnitude. They weren't small vanities or insecurities. They were people. Real people with real lives, connected to us by blood and history, kept separate by his choice. I made a decision then, sitting on the porch swing where Walter had spent so many evenings. I would bring these separate worlds together. Not to punish Walter, he was beyond punishment now, but to heal what he had broken, to create wholeness from the fragments he'd left behind. That evening, I called Catherine in Providence. Her voice was cautious when she answered. "Mrs. Winters? Eleanor?" "Please call me Eleanor. I hope I'm not disturbing you." "No, not at all." A pause. "I've been expecting your call, to be honest, ever since Rebecca visited." "I only just found out about you and Daniel," I said. "Walter never told me." A soft sigh. "I thought as much. Walter was always compartmentalized. He could separate parts of his life completely. It was a skill in its way, not a healthy one, but impressive nonetheless." "I'd like to meet you," I said. "And Daniel, if that's all right. I think Daniel would like that very much. He's been asking about his other family since Rebecca's visit." We arranged for me to visit the following month. As I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Walter's death, a sense of purpose, of forward motion. For months, I'd been stuck in a limbo of grief and confusion. Now I had a direction, even if the path ahead was uncertain. Ryan arrived from Seattle 2 days later, looking tired and grim. Richard came over that evening, and I asked Rebecca to join us. It was time for the whole family to talk. We gathered in the living room, the same room where we'd opened Christmas presents, celebrated birthdays, mourned Walter together just months earlier. I told them everything I'd learned, showed them the letters, the diary, the photos. When I finished, the silence was heavy. Richard spoke first, his voice tight with anger. "I can't believe he lied to us our whole lives. What kind of man does that?" "A frightened one," Rebecca said quietly. "A man who made a terrible mistake when he was young and never found the courage to face it." "That's no excuse," Richard snapped. "He had decades to tell the truth, to make it right." "He tried, in his way," I said, thinking of the monthly payments, the toys never given. "He just couldn't face the consequences of the truth." "So what do we do now?" Ryan asked, running a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Walter's that it made my heart ache. "I'm going to Providence next month to meet Catherine and Daniel," I said. "I'd like you all to come with me." Rebecca nodded immediately. Richard looked uncomfortable, but agreed. Ryan stared out the window for a long moment before turning back to me. "I'll be there," he said finally. "We all should be." The weeks before our trip to Providence were filled with preparations and conversations. Long phone calls with Catherine arranging our visit, discussions with my children about what this meant for our family, for their understanding of their father. Nights spent reading and rereading Walter's diary, searching for clues to the man he truly was. I also continued visiting Marion's grave at Riverside Cemetery, often bringing fresh flowers. I talked to her sometimes, telling her about the discoveries I was making, apologizing for not knowing about her sooner. It felt important somehow, this connection to Walter's sister, even if it came too late. One afternoon, about a week before our planned trip, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a small, elderly woman with silver hair and bright eyes standing on my porch. "Eleanor Winters?" she asked, her voice quavering slightly. "Yes? I'm Agnes Prescott. I was Marion's nurse at Greenville Care Center for the last 8 years. She held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Marion asked me to give you this if anything happened to her. I've been meaning to bring it for months, but my health hasn't been the best." I invited her in, offered tea. As we sat in the kitchen, Agnes told me about Marion, how she loved to paint, how she would sit for hours watching birds at the feeder outside her window, how she kept a photograph of Walter by her bed. "She talked about him all the time," Agnes said, "her little brother who became a mathematics teacher. She was so proud of him." "Did she ever mention me? Or our children?" Agnes hesitated. "She knew about you all." Walter showed her pictures sometimes, but she understood she wasn't supposed to talk about you to others. After Agnes left, I carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a small watercolor painting of a house with green shutters, the house from the photographs in Walter's drawer. On the back, in shaky handwriting, "For Eleanor, the house where Walter and I grew up. I wish we could have met while I was alive. Marion." I traced the lines of the painting with my fingertip, feeling a connection to this woman I'd never known in life. Walter's sister, my children's aunt, part of our family kept separate by fear and shame. The day before our trip to Providence, I visited Walter's grave. It was a beautiful spot under an old oak tree with a view of the mountains he'd loved. The headstone was simple, just as he'd wanted. Walter James Winters, beloved husband and father, 1950-2020. I stood there for a long time, the spring breeze rustling the leaves overhead. I wasn't angry anymore, just sad for all the wasted years, the connections never made, the truth never spoken. "I'm meeting your son tomorrow," I said finally. "Our son, in a way, though I never got to see him grow up. I wish you'd trusted me enough to tell me." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "I loved you, Walter. The real you, not just the version you showed me. I would have loved all of you, even the parts you were ashamed of." As I turned to leave, I noticed a small blue flower growing beside the headstone, a forget-me-not. I smiled at the irony. Walter would not be forgotten, but he would be remembered completely now, not selectively. The good and the bad, the courage and the cowardice, the love and the abandonment, the whole complicated, contradictory man. Our trip to Providence was scheduled for the first weekend in May. Richard, Rebecca, Ryan, and I flew together, a family united in nervous anticipation. We checked into a small hotel downtown, then took a taxi to Catherine's address. The house was just as Rebecca had described, small but charming, with window boxes full of geraniums and a well-tended garden. My heart pounded as we approached the front door. What would I say to this woman who had shared a connection with my husband that I'd never known about? What would I feel when I saw Walter's firstborn son? Catherine opened the door before we could knock. She was tall and slender, with silver-streaked dark hair and kind eyes. She looked at each of us in turn, her gaze lingering on Ryan. "You look just like him," she said softly, "when he was young." Ryan swallowed hard. "So I've been told." Catherine invited us in. The house was cozy and lived in, filled with books and photographs. Daniel was waiting in the living room, sitting on the edge of an armchair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He stood when we entered, his face breaking into a wide smile that was startlingly familiar, Walter's smile. "My family," he said, his voice clear and joyful. "My brother and sister and brother." He pointed to each of my children in turn, then looked at me. "And Walter's wife." "Eleanor," I said gently. "It's wonderful to meet you, Daniel." What happened next was both awkward and beautiful. We sat together, this strange fractured family, and began the slow work of getting to know each other. Daniel showed us his baseball card collection, his bird identification books, the model trains Walter had sent him over the years but never seen him play with. Catherine served lunch, and we talked. About Walter, about Daniel's childhood, about the lives that had run parallel for so long without intersecting. There were tears, from all of us at different moments, but also laughter, especially when Daniel would say or do something that reminded us powerfully of Walter. "He holds his fork exactly like Dad did," Rebecca whispered to me at one point, her eyes shining with tears. "And he has that same head tilt when he's listening," Richard added, his earlier anger softening into something more complex. After lunch, while Daniel showed Richard and Ryan his backyard bird feeders, Catherine and I sat on the porch with Rebecca. Catherine handed me a small photo album. "I thought you might want to see these," she said. "I kept them for Daniel so he would know what his father looked like." The album contained newspaper clippings about Walter's academic achievements, his teaching awards. There were even a few photos. Walter at a mathematics conference, Walter in a group picture with his students. Catherine had pieced together a life from a distance, creating a father for Daniel from fragments found in public records. "How did you do it?" I asked. "Raise him alone, knowing Walter had abandoned you both?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, looking out at the garden where Daniel was enthusiastically explaining something to his half-brothers. "It wasn't easy at first," she admitted. "I was angry for a long time. But then Daniel was born, and he was so perfect. Different than I expected, but perfect in his own way. And I realized that being angry at Walter wouldn't help Daniel, so I focused on giving him the best life I could. Did Walter ever see him? Even once?" Catherine shook her head. "He called once when Daniel was about 5, said he wanted to visit. I was so hopeful, but he never came. The checks started arriving after that, regular as clockwork, but never Walter himself. I felt a profound sadness for all that Walter had missed. This remarkable woman, this extraordinary son. What fear had been so powerful that it kept him away? The fear of confronting his own failure, perhaps, or the fear that loving Daniel would somehow diminish his love for Richard, Rebecca, and Ryan. As the afternoon waned, Daniel approached me, holding something in his hands. It was a small wooden box, intricately carved with mathematical symbols, circles, triangles, equations. "For you," he said, placing it in my hands. "Dad sent it for my 40th birthday. He made it. I want you to have it." I opened the box carefully. Inside was a folded note in Walter's precise handwriting. "For Daniel, on your 40th birthday. I wish I had the courage to give this to you in person. Perhaps someday. With love, your father." I looked up at Daniel, this man with Walter's smile and Walter's laugh, who had grown up without knowing his father except through gifts and checks. "Thank you," I said, my voice breaking, "but this is yours. He made it for you." Daniel shook his head firmly. "I have many things from Dad. You should have this one, to remember him." As if I could ever forget. We stayed until evening, exchanging phone numbers and email addresses, promising to visit again, to stay in touch. As we prepared to leave, Daniel hugged each of us tightly, holding on a little longer with Ryan, who had been quiet for most of the visit. "Brothers," Daniel said, patting Ryan's back. "We look alike." Ryan nodded, his composure finally breaking. "Yeah, we do. We have the same eyes." In the taxi back to our hotel, no one spoke for several minutes. Then Richard cleared his throat. "I think we should invite them to Asheville. For Thanksgiving, maybe. Their family." Rebecca reached across the seat and squeezed his hand. "I'd like that." Ryan nodded, looking out the window at the passing streets of Providence. "Dad really messed up," he said quietly. "But Daniel, he's amazing. I'm glad we found him." I thought about what awaited us back in Asheville. The house with its memories of Walter, the community that had known only the version of him he chose to present, the life I was trying to rebuild without him. It would be different now, knowing what I knew, but perhaps better, more honest. A life built on the whole truth, not just the convenient parts. That night in the hotel, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, looking out at the city lights, thinking about the day's events, about Catherine's quiet strength, Daniel's joyful acceptance, my children's conflicted emotions, about Walter, who had lived his life in carefully separated compartments, never allowing them to touch. I wondered if he had found peace before the end, if, in those final days as cancer consumed him, he had made peace with his choices, his regrets. I hoped so. Despite everything, I wanted that for him. The next morning, before we flew home, I asked the taxi to make a detour. We stopped at the Providence Public Library where Daniel worked. It wasn't open yet, but I stood on the steps, imagining him inside, shelving books with care and precision, just as Walter had arranged his desk, his tools, his life. "He's happy," Rebecca said, standing beside me. "That's something, isn't it? Despite everything, Daniel is happy." "Yes," I agreed. "That's something." We returned to Asheville that afternoon. The house felt different when I walked in, less haunted by Walter's absence, more filled with the complexity of his presence. I placed the wooden box Daniel had given me on the mantel, next to a photograph of Walter with our children. The next few weeks were a time of adjustment, of processing all I had learned. I spent hours going through Walter's papers, his books, his belongings, not looking for more secrets, but trying to understand the man I had married, the man who had loved me in his way, even while keeping parts of himself hidden. I found small clues I'd missed before. A book on Down syndrome hidden behind his mathematics texts, brochures from special education programs in Providence, a letter from a lawyer regarding trust funds and guardianship arrangements. Walter had cared about Daniel in his way. He just couldn't bridge the gap between caring and acknowledging, between financial support and emotional presence, between responsibility and love. One evening, about a month after our Providence trip, Richard came by with a small cardboard box. "I found this in Dad's storage unit," he said. "I think it's for Daniel." Inside was a collection of mathematical puzzles and games, many handmade. Each was labeled with a date and a brief note. For Daniel, age 10, he might enjoy the pattern recognition. For Daniel, age 15, the geometric principles should appeal to him. For Daniel, age 25, challenging but not impossible. Gifts Walter had made but never given. Connections he'd imagined but never fulfilled. "Should we send them to him?" Richard asked. I nodded, with a letter explaining where they came from. I think he'd like that. That summer, Catherine and Daniel visited us in Asheville. We showed them Walter's favorite places, the botanical garden where he volunteered after retirement, the coffee shop where he read the newspaper every Sunday morning, the overlook on the Blue Ridge Parkway where we often watched the sunset. Daniel took photographs of everything, carefully documenting his father's world. At the cemetery, he placed a small model train on Walter's grave. "So Dad won't be lonely," he explained. Catherine and I sat on the porch swing one evening, watching Daniel and my children playing a board game in the yard. The sound of their laughter floated up to us on the warm summer air. "I never thought this would happen," Catherine said, "all of us together like this." "Neither did I admitted, "but I'm glad it has." "Walter was a complicated man," she said after a moment. "Not good or bad, just complicated." "Yes," I agreed. "He was. And maybe we all are," I thought. "Maybe we all have parts of ourselves we hide, even from those closest to us. Maybe we all create narratives about our lives that omit the chapters we're ashamed of. The difference with Walter was the magnitude of his omissions, the people he kept separate, the lives he compartmentalized, the connections he severed or never allowed to form. As summer turned to fall, I continued the work of integrating the separate worlds Walter had created. I visited Marion's grave regularly, placing flowers and sometimes sitting to tell her about Daniel, about Catherine, about the family that was slowly becoming whole. I invited Catherine and Daniel to join us for Thanksgiving, as Richard had suggested. They accepted happily. Rebecca arranged to come with her family. Ryan decided to stay in Asheville permanently, taking a job at the local community college teaching computer science. "Dad would be pleased," he said when he told me about the position. "He always wanted one of us to go into education." "Yes," I agreed. "He would be proud." Slowly, I was finding a way to hold the contradictions of Walter in my heart, the loving husband and father, the abandoning father and son, the dedicated teacher, the secretive man, The person I knew, the person I didn't. On the anniversary of Walter's death, we gathered at the cemetery, Richard, Rebecca, Ryan, Catherine, Daniel, and I. We placed flowers on his grave and stood together in silence for a moment. Then Daniel spoke, his voice clear in the autumn air. "I forgive you, Dad, for not being there. I had a good life anyway." One by one, the others spoke. Words of forgiveness, of understanding, of love, despite everything. When it was my turn, I placed my hand on the cold stone of Walter's headstone. "I loved you, Walter," I said simply. "All of you, even the parts you never showed me." And I did. Despite the secrets, despite the lies of omission, despite the separate lives he'd led, I loved him. Not the idealized version I'd constructed during our marriage, but the real man, flawed, fearful, and human. That evening, we gathered at our house, Walter's house, for dinner. The table was crowded with family, with conversation, with life. Daniel sat in Walter's chair at the head of the table, looking so much like his father that it made my heart catch. After dinner, as we sat in the living room with coffee and pie, Catherine handed me a small package. "I found this among some of Walter's old things I'd kept," she said. "I think he would want you to have it." Inside was a small notebook, its pages yellowed with age. I opened it carefully. It contained poems, love poems, written in Walter's handwriting, dated from the early years of our marriage. "To Eleanor, who sees the best in me," one was titled. Another, "For my wife, who makes me want to be better than I am." I read them through tears, these expressions of love from a man who had struggled to be worthy of that love, who had compartmentalized his life out of fear and shame, yet who had loved deeply, in his imperfect way. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket against the autumn chill. The mountains were dark silhouettes against the night sky, the stars bright overhead. I thought about the journey of the past year, from the midnight phone call that had shattered my understanding of my husband to this moment of fragile peace, from confusion and betrayal to a more complex, more honest kind of love. Walter had been right about one thing. I did see the best in him. I always had. But now I saw all of him, the courage and the cowardice, the love and the fear, the truth and the lies. And somehow, I loved him more for his humanity, not less. As I sat there, I felt a sense of his presence, not as a ghost or a spirit, but as a memory so strong it seemed almost tangible. The Walter I knew and the Walter I was still coming to know, the whole, complicated, contradictory man. "I understand now," I whispered to the night air. "And I forgive you." The phone in the drawer never rang again. It didn't need to. The connections had been made, the truth had been spoken, the separate worlds united. And in that union, I found a peace I hadn't known was possible. A peace that came not from forgetting or ignoring, but from embracing the whole truth. Painful and beautiful, simple and complex. Because even a life built on secrets can find redemption in honesty. Even a heart broken by betrayal can heal through understanding. Even a family fractured by fear can become whole through love. Have you ever discovered that someone you loved deeply wasn't who you thought they were? How did you reconcile the person you knew with the truth you discovered? The seasons continued to change. Leaves fell, snow blanketed the mountains, then melted away as spring returned. Life moved forward as it always does, with or without our permission. Daniel came to stay with me for 2 weeks that spring. We spent our days exploring Asheville together, visiting the art galleries downtown, feeding the ducks at the park, attending a baseball game at the local stadium. In the evenings, we sat on the porch and talked. Daniel was a wonderful conversationalist once he felt comfortable. He spoke about his job at the library, his friends at the community center, his collection of model trains, and sometimes he spoke about Walter. "Did Dad like baseball?" he asked one evening as we watched the sunset. "He did," I told him. "The Boston Red Sox were his team. He never missed a game on TV." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Me too. I like the Red Sox too." He smiled, pleased with this connection. "What else did Dad like?" So I told him. About Walter's love of classical music and mystery novels, his habit of doing the crossword puzzle in ink, his preference for butter pecan ice cream, small details that seemed to delight Daniel, each one a thread connecting him to the father he'd never really known. "Was Dad happy?" Daniel asked on our last evening together. The question caught me off guard with its directness, its insight. I considered my answer carefully. "I think he wanted to be," I said finally. "I think he tried to be. But he carried a lot of sadness, too, about choices he made." Daniel nodded, seeming to understand. About me? Yes, I admitted. About you, about Marion, about many things. It's okay, Daniel said simply. Everyone makes mistakes. I marveled at his capacity for forgiveness, his ability to accept the complicated truth without bitterness. There was a wisdom in Daniel that went beyond intellectual understanding, an emotional intelligence that Walter, for all his academic brilliance, had never quite mastered. After Daniel returned to Providence, I found myself thinking more about Walter's early life, the years before I met him. The diary entries about Marion had offered glimpses, but there were still so many gaps. I decided to visit Vermont, where Walter had grown up. The small town of Bradford was nestled in the Green Mountains, a picturesque New England community with white church steeples and colonial homes. I stayed at a bed and breakfast on the main street and spent my days exploring the places mentioned in Walter's diary. The house with green shutters was still there, though it had been renovated and expanded. I stood across the street looking at the place where Walter and Marion had spent their childhood, where the patterns of secrecy and shame had first been established. At the local historical society, I found school yearbooks with Walter's serious young face, mathematics club president, chess team captain, valedictorian. There was no mention of Marion in any of the yearbooks, as if she had never existed. The elderly librarian noticed my interest. "Are you related to the Winters family?" she asked. "I was married to Walter Winters," I told her. Her face lit up with recognition. "Walter, such a brilliant boy. We all knew he'd go far." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Such a shame about his sister, though. The family kept it very quiet, but in a small town, people know." "What happened to her?" I asked, though I already knew the outlines of the story. The librarian's expression turned sad. "Mental illness. Schizophrenia, I believe. They sent her away when the episodes got bad. Walter was just a boy then, 12 or 13. It affected him deeply. He became very contained after that. Very private." I thanked her for the information and left, walking through the quiet streets of Bradford with a heavy heart. I could imagine young Walter watching his sister being taken away, being told never to speak of her again, learning that some things, some people, were too shameful to acknowledge. The patterns established in childhood often repeat throughout our lives. Walter had learned early that family secrets were to be kept, that vulnerability was dangerous, that appearances mattered more than truth. He had carried these lessons into adulthood, into our marriage, into his relationship with all his children. On my last day in Vermont, I visited the cemetery where Walter's parents were buried. Their headstone was simple and dignified, much like Walter's. I stood there for a long time thinking about the legacy they had passed to their son. Not just genes and education, but patterns of behavior, ways of coping with pain and shame. Had they known about Daniel? Had Walter told them about the child he'd abandoned? Or had he kept that secret from them too, compartmentalizing his life even then? I would never know. The answers had died with Walter, with his parents. All I had were fragments, pieces of a puzzle I was still assembling. When I returned to Asheville, I found a letter waiting from Catherine. Her health was declining, she wrote. The cancer had returned, more aggressive this time. She was putting her affairs in order and wanted to discuss Daniel's future. I called her immediately. "What can I do?" I asked. "How can I help?" Catherine's voice was weak but determined. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," she said. "Daniel is fairly independent, but he needs some supervision, some support. I've set up a trust fund with the money Walter sent over the years, but money isn't everything. What are you asking, Catherine?" A long pause. "I'm not asking anything, Eleanor. I'm offering you a choice. Daniel could move to Asheville after I'm gone, be near his siblings, his family, but only if that's what you all want. Only if he would be truly welcomed." The decision wasn't just mine to make. I called a family meeting. Richard, Rebecca, Ryan, all gathered in our living room. I explained Catherine's situation, her suggestion. "Daniel could live in the guest house," I said. "It's private, but close enough that we could check on him regularly. He could get a job at the library here, continue the life he's built, just with us." My children exchanged glances. Richard spoke first. "I think it's the right thing to do. He's our brother." Rebecca nodded. "I agree. Daniel should be with family." Ryan, who had grown especially close to Daniel over the past year, looked relieved. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've already been looking into job opportunities for him at the county library." So it was decided. I called Catherine the next day to tell her our decision. Her relief was palpable. "Thank you," she said. "This gives me peace." The next few months were busy with preparations. Ryan and I flew to Providence to help Catherine with legal arrangements, to talk with Daniel's doctors and support team, to begin the process of transitioning his life to Asheville. Daniel was excited about the move, though sad about leaving Catherine. He understood, in his way, that she was dying. That knowledge gave a poignancy to their last months together, a tenderness that was beautiful to witness. "Mom is going to heaven," he told me matter-of-factly one afternoon as we sorted through his belongings, "but she says I'll be okay because I have my other family now." Catherine passed away peacefully in her sleep on a cold November morning. Daniel had been with her the night before, holding her hand, telling her he loved her. At the funeral, he stood tall between Richard and Ryan, accepting condolences with quiet dignity. A week later, we brought Daniel home to Asheville. The guest house had been prepared for him, his books arranged on shelves, his model train set up on a special table Ryan had built, his bird feeders installed outside the windows. "This is my house now," he said, looking around with satisfaction, "near my family." That first Christmas with Daniel was a revelation. He approached the holiday with childlike enthusiasm but adult appreciation. He helped decorate the tree, carefully hanging each ornament with deliberate placement. He baked cookies with Rebecca and the twins, flour dusting his serious face. He wrapped presents with meticulous attention to corners and tape. On Christmas Eve, as we gathered in the living room with hot chocolate and the traditional reading of A Christmas Carol, I looked around at my expanded family. Richard and Jennifer, their teenage sons now tall and lanky. Rebecca and Thomas, the twins now almost teenagers themselves. Ryan, who had found a sense of purpose in helping Daniel transition to Asheville. And Daniel, Walter's firstborn son, finally home with his family. There was an empty space where Walter should have been. I felt his absence keenly at moments like this. Family gatherings, holidays, milestones. But I also felt his presence in a new way. In Daniel's laugh, so like his. In the careful way Richard folded his napkin at dinner. In Rebecca's talent for mathematics, in Ryan's quiet stubbornness. Walter lived on in his children, all of his children. The legacy he'd left was complicated, marked by both love and failure, both presence and absence. But it was a human legacy, real and flawed and ultimately redeemed by truth. As the new year began, I found myself settling into a different kind of life. The shock of discovery had faded, replaced by a more nuanced understanding. The anger had dissipated, making room for compassion, for Walter, for myself, for all of us trying to make sense of the past while creating a better future. Daniel thrived in Asheville. He got a job at the county library, shelving books and helping with children's reading programs. He joined a Special Olympics bowling team, made friends at the community center, became a familiar and beloved figure in our neighborhood. One spring afternoon, as I worked in the garden Walter had loved, Daniel came to help me. We planted tomatoes and peppers, marigolds and zinnias. His large hands were gentle with the seedlings, patient and careful. "Dad liked gardening too," he said, patting soil around a tomato plant. "He did," I agreed. "He spent hours out here." Daniel nodded, satisfied with this connection. Then he looked at me with his clear, direct gaze. "Do you think Dad would be happy now, with all of us together?" I considered the question, wanting to give him an honest answer. "I think he would be relieved," I said finally. "I think he carried a lot of fear and shame about the past, about the mistakes he made. Knowing that we've all found each other, that we're a family despite everything, I think that would give him peace." Daniel seemed to accept this. He returned to his planting, humming softly to himself, a tune I recognized as one Walter used to whistle while he worked. Later that evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I thought about Daniel's question. Would Walter be happy with how things had turned out? With the secrets exposed, the separate worlds united, the truth acknowledged? I would never know for certain, but I liked to think he would be, that somewhere, the weight of secrecy lifted from his shoulders, Walter was at peace. The phone in the drawer remained silent, its battery long dead. I kept it, though, along with Marion's painting, Catherine's letters, Walter's diary. Tangible reminders of the complicated, contradictory man I had married, the man I continued to love, not despite his flaws, but with full awareness of them. Because that's what real love is, isn't it? Not the idealized version we create in our minds, but the messy, human reality. Not loving who we wish someone was, but who they actually are. Broken parts, mistakes, regrets and all. 2 years after Walter's death, I finally felt ready to move his clothes from our closet. It was a task I'd been avoiding, this final acknowledgement that he was truly gone. Daniel offered to help me, his practical nature making the emotional task more manageable. Together, we sorted through Walter's belongings, the tweed jackets with elbow patches he wore to teach, the sweaters I'd given him for Christmas over the years, the collection of bow ties he'd favored for special occasions. "Can I have this one?" Daniel asked, holding up a blue sweater. "It's soft." "Of course," I told him. "Take anything you'd like." He selected a few items, the blue sweater, a plaid scarf, a Boston Red Sox cap, things he could wear, tangible connections to the father he'd never really known. As we worked, Daniel chatted about his life, his job at the library, a woman named Sarah he'd met at his day program, a bird identification class he was taking at the community center. His life was full and rich despite the early abandonment, despite the late-in-life loss of his mother. I marveled at his resilience, his capacity for joy despite everything. There was a lesson there, I thought, about accepting what can't be changed, about finding happiness in the present rather than dwelling on past hurts. When we finished with the closet, Daniel helped me carry bags of clothes to my car for donation. As we loaded the last bag, he turned to me with his direct gaze. "I'm glad Dad married you," he said. "You're a good mom to everyone." The simple statement brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Daniel. That means a lot to me." That night, I wrote in my own diary, a practice I'd begun after Walter's death as a way to process my thoughts and feelings. I wrote about Daniel's words, about the day spent sorting through Walter's clothes, about the ongoing process of integrating the separate worlds he'd created. "Walter's greatest gift to me," I wrote, "was not the life we shared, though that was precious. It was not our children, though they are my heart. It was the opportunity after his death to practice a deeper kind of love, one that encompasses the whole truth, not just the convenient parts, one that accepts flaws and failures as part of the person, not exceptions to be ignored, one that understands that we are all, in our way, keeping secrets, presenting versions of ourselves to the world, struggling to bridge the gap between who we are and who we wish to be." 3 years after Walter's death, I received an unexpected letter. It was from a woman named Elizabeth Donahue, Catherine's younger sister. She had found my address among Catherine's papers and wanted to connect. "I've heard so much about you from Catherine and Daniel," she wrote. "I feel like I already know you. I'd love to meet sometime, to talk about Catherine, about Walter, about the strange way our lives have intersected." I invited her to visit, and she arrived in Asheville that autumn, a petite woman with Catherine's eyes and quick smile. We sat on the porch swing, drinking tea and sharing stories. "Catherine never blamed Walter, you know," Elizabeth told me. "She was angry at first, of course, but as the years passed, she came to understand his fear, his immaturity. She forgave him long ago." "Did you?" I asked. "Forgive him?" Elizabeth considered this. "Eventually, it was harder for me. I saw what Catherine went through, raising Daniel alone, but I also saw the joy Daniel brought her, the purpose he gave her life." She sipped her tea thoughtfully, and Walter did provide financially, which was more than many men would have done back then. We talked for hours about Catherine's life, about Daniel's childhood, about the complex legacy Walter had left us all. As evening fell, Elizabeth asked the question I'd been expecting. "Were you happy with him? With Walter?" "Yes," I said, without hesitation. "We had a good life together. He was a good husband, a good father to our children. He was just incomplete. Part of him was always missing, always elsewhere." Elizabeth nodded, understanding. Catherine used to say that about him too, that he seemed split, divided, present but also absent in some fundamental way. As we continued talking, I realized that Elizabeth was giving me a gift, another perspective on Walter, another piece of the puzzle. Through her eyes, through Catherine's memories, I saw yet another version of my husband. The young graduate student, ambitious and charming, the frightened young man fleeing responsibility, the distant provider sending checks but never visiting. All these Walters were true. All were aspects of the complex, contradictory man I had married, the mathematician who could solve complex equations, but not the equation of his own heart, the teacher who imparted knowledge but kept his own truth hidden, the father who loved his children but couldn't love all of them equally or openly. After Elizabeth left, I found myself thinking about the nature of truth, of memory, of love, how we construct narratives about the people in our lives, narratives that are always partial, always subjective, how we fill in the gaps with assumptions, with hopes, with fears, how we never truly know another person completely, not our parents, not our children, not even our spouses of 42 years. Walter had kept secrets, yes, but hadn't I also created a version of him that suited me? Hadn't I chosen, consciously or unconsciously, to ignore the inconsistencies, the evasions, the locked drawer? Hadn't I participated in the fiction of our perfect life? The truth, as always, was somewhere in between, more complicated than either narrative, more human than either version. 5 years after Walter's death, I decided to write his story, our story, not for publication, but for our family, for Richard, Rebecca, and Ryan, for Daniel, for the grandchildren who would grow up knowing only pieces of their grandfather, for the great-grandchildren who would know him only through stories. I started with the facts as I knew them: Walter's childhood in Vermont, Marion's illness, his escape to college, his relationship with Catherine, Daniel's birth and abandonment, our meeting and marriage, our children, his secret support of both Marion and Daniel, his death, and the discoveries that followed. But facts alone couldn't capture Walter, so I also wrote about his laugh, deep and unexpected from such a serious man, about his passion for mathematics, the way his eyes lit up when explaining a complex theorem, about his gentleness with our children, reading bedtime stories, teaching bicycle riding, helping with homework, about his garden, the careful way he tended each plant, the pride he took in homegrown tomatoes. I wrote about our arguments too, infrequent but intense, often ending with Walter retreating into silence rather than confronting the issue, about his occasional melancholy, periods when he would withdraw, become distant, unreachable, about the locked drawer, the physical manifestation of the emotional compartments in which he lived his life. It took me months to complete the manuscript. When I finished, I had it bound into simple books, one for each of my children, one for Daniel, one for myself. I gave them out at Christmas, 7 years after Walter's death. "This is your father's story," I told them. "Not perfect, not complete, but as true as I can make it, so you'll understand. So you'll remember." They accepted the books with solemn appreciation, understanding the gift for what it was, not just a biography, but a reconciliation, an attempt to integrate the father they knew with the man he had been, with all his complexity and contradiction. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in Walter's study, now my writing room, and looked at the photographs on the wall. Walter and me on our wedding day. Walter with Richard, Rebecca, and Ryan at various ages. New additions: Walter's parents, Marion's painting, a photograph of young Walter with Catherine that Elizabeth had sent me, a picture of Daniel at his library job. The whole Walter, finally assembled. Not perfect, not complete, but more true than the partial version I had known for 42 years. The phone in the drawer never rang again, but in a way, it had accomplished its purpose. It had been the first crack in the wall between Walter's separate worlds, the beginning of a truth that, while painful, had ultimately brought healing. As I sat there, surrounded by images of Walter's fragmented life now made whole, I felt a sense of completion, of peace. Not because the pain was gone, it would always hurt that Walter hadn't trusted me with his whole self, but because understanding had replaced confusion, compassion had replaced anger, wholeness had replaced division. In the end, isn't that what we all want? To be known completely and loved anyway. To have our whole selves, the good and the bad, the public and the private, the light and the shadow, embraced and accepted. To be integrated rather than divided, authentic rather than performative. Walter never achieved that integration in life, but perhaps, through our collective remembering and forgiving, he had found it in death. And I had found something too, a deeper understanding of love, of truth, of the complex, contradictory nature of the human heart. An understanding that would guide me through the remaining years of my life, informing my relationships with my children, my grandchildren, with Daniel, with myself. Because even a life built on secrets can find redemption in truth. Even a heart broken by betrayal can heal through understanding. Even a family fractured by fear can become whole through love. And sometimes it takes a midnight phone call from beyond the grave to set that healing in motion. Do you believe we ever truly know the people we love? Or do we all keep parts of ourselves hidden, even from those closest to our hearts? 10 years after Walter's death, life had settled into new patterns. Daniel was firmly established in Asheville, beloved by his siblings and their families, a treasured part of our community. Richard had retired early from his law practice and was teaching part-time at the university. Rebecca had published a successful series of children's books. Ryan had married a kind woman named Laura, and they had a daughter, Catherine, named for Daniel's mother. I was 78 now, my hair fully silver, my steps slower but still steady. I still lived in the house Walter and I had shared, though I'd made changes, repainting rooms, rearranging furniture, creating a space that reflected my life now rather than our life then. The drawer where I'd found the phone remained in my bedroom, though I'd long since emptied it of its secrets. Now it held ordinary things, reading glasses, hand lotion, bookmarks. The compartments of Walter's life had been opened, their contents examined and understood. There was no need to maintain the separations he had created. On a warm September evening, I sat on the porch with Daniel. We often spent time together like this, comfortable silences interspersed with conversation, watching the sun set over the mountains Walter had loved. "I'm 60 years old today," Daniel said suddenly. I turned to him, surprised. "Today is your birthday? Why didn't you say something? We should celebrate." He smiled, that smile so like Walter's. "It's okay. I know I'm old now." "Not old," I corrected gently. "Experienced. Wise." Daniel considered this, then nodded. "Yes, wise." He was quiet for a moment, watching a cardinal at the feeder. "Mom said Dad was wise too, smart about numbers and books." "He was," I agreed, "but not always wise about people, about feelings." Daniel nodded again, his expression serious. "That's hard sometimes. Feelings are complicated." "Yes, they are." I reached over and patted his hand. "You're very good with feelings, though. You understand people." He smiled, pleased with the compliment. "I try to be kind. That's important." We sat in silence for a while longer, the evening settling around us like a comfortable blanket. Then Daniel spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "I used to be sad that Dad didn't want to meet me, but now I understand better. He was scared." The simple insight, delivered without bitterness or judgment, brought tears to my eyes. "Yes," I said, "he was scared of many things." Daniel nodded, satisfied with this confirmation. "It's okay to be scared sometimes, but it's good to be brave too." He looked at me directly. "You're brave, Eleanor. You weren't scared to meet me." I thought about that midnight phone call 10 years ago, about all that had followed, the discoveries, the confrontations, the gradual piecing together of Walter's fragmented life. Had I been brave? Or simply determined to understand, to know the truth, no matter how painful? I was scared, I admitted, but I wanted to know you more than I was afraid. Daniel seemed to understand this distinction. That's being brave, doing something even when you're scared. As darkness fell, we moved inside. Daniel said goodnight and walked to his guest house, his figure silhouetted against the twilight. I watched him go, this man who was Walter's son, who had Walter's laugh and Walter's eyes, but a wisdom entirely his own. Later that night, I sat at my desk and opened my diary. I'd maintained the habit of writing regularly, finding it helped me process my thoughts, clarify my feelings. Tonight, prompted by my conversation with Daniel, I wrote about courage, Walter's lack of it in some areas, my own journey to find it, Daniel's natural embodiment of it. Perhaps courage, I wrote, is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it, to look at the truth, however painful, rather than hide from it. Walter could not find that courage during his lifetime. His fear of judgment, of failure, of being truly known was too powerful. It kept him divided, compartmentalized, never fully present in any part of his life. But in the end, his secrets were revealed anyway. The truth found its way to light, as truth always does, and we who loved him were left to make sense of it, to integrate the man we knew with the man he was, to find wholeness where he had maintained division. And somehow, in that process, we found a deeper kind of love, one based not on idealization, but on understanding, not on perfection, but on acceptance of human frailty, not on what should have been, but on what was, with all its complexity and contradiction. Walter would have been 80 today. I wonder what he would think of the family we've become, expanded, blended, united by truth rather than divided by secrets. I like to believe he would be pleased, perhaps even a little amazed, that his greatest fear, exposure, led not to rejection, but to a deeper kind of acceptance than he ever allowed himself to experience in life. I closed my diary and prepared for bed. As I turned off the light, I glanced at the drawer where I'd found the phone 10 years ago, the drawer that had changed everything. "Thank you," I whispered, though I wasn't sure to whom, to Walter, to Marion, to whatever twist of fate had caused that phone to ring at midnight and set me on this journey of discovery. Because despite the pain, despite the betrayal, despite the years of secrecy, I was grateful. Grateful for the truth, however belated. Grateful for Daniel, for Catherine, for Marion, the missing pieces of our family puzzle. Grateful even for Walter's flaws, his fears, his failures, because they had taught me about the complexity of the human heart, about the possibility of loving someone completely without loving them blindly. As I drifted toward sleep, I thought I heard the faint sound of a phone ringing, but it was just the wind in the trees outside my window, just the ordinary music of a September night in the mountains Walter had loved. The phone in the drawer was silent, its purpose long since fulfilled. The truth was out. The separate worlds were united. The healing was complete. And in that completion, in that integration, Walter lived on, not as the perfect husband and father I had once believed him to be, nor as the coward who abandoned his firstborn son, but as the complex, contradictory man he truly was, loving and fearful, present and absent, honest and secretive, human. Completely, imperfectly, authentically human, and loved by me, by our children, by Daniel, not despite his humanity, but because of it. Not for the man he pretended to be, but for the man he was, with all his broken places, all his hidden corners, all his unspoken truths. Because in the end, that's what love is. Not blind adoration, but clear-eyed acceptance. Not ignorance of flaws, but embrace of the whole person, broken parts and all. Walter never understood that. He lived and died believing that he had to compartmentalize himself to be loved, that the truth would destroy the connection rather than deepen it. But he was wrong. The midnight phone call that revealed his secrets didn't end our love story. It transformed it, made it richer, more complex, more true. And in that transformation, in that truth, we all found peace. Walter's children, Walter's wives, and perhaps, somewhere beyond our understanding, Walter himself. Because even a heart divided can find wholeness in truth. Even a life lived in fragments can become complete through love. Even a secret kept for decades can, when finally revealed, lead not to destruction, but to healing. And sometimes it takes a phone call from beyond the grave to teach us that the truth, however painful, sets us free in ways we never imagined possible. If this story touched your heart, please like and share. Because sometimes hearing another woman's pain makes us feel less alone in our own.